I've Got a Secret was a CBS game show that premiered on June 19th, 1952, and ran for an incredible 15 years until 1967. The framework of the show was simple. A panel of contestants was charged with the task of determining a guest's secret through a series of questions, a secret being something that was unusual, amazing, embarrassing, or humorous about that guest. My grandparents, my parents, many of you, watched this show and loved it. And the other day, I was forwarded a YouTube clip of the I've Got a Secret episode that aired on February 9th, 1956. Both my parents could have seen that show live. Now, the host, Gary Moore, personally escorted the guest onto the show, and even in the grainy black and white of 1950s television, it's possible to see how old the man was. And he walks holding a shaky cane with one hand and holding Gary Moore with the other, and slowly makes his way to his seat. "My name is Samuel J. Seymour, and I'm from Maryland," he says to the panel that included Bill Cullen, Jane Meadows, Henry Morgan, Lucille Ball. "I'm 96 years old," he says. And then his secret is revealed to the audience and to the folks watching at home. And when it is, there's this collective gasp of disbelief from the men and women in the studio. Gary Moore says that the secret has something to do with what Mr. Seymour witnessed. And then the questions from the panel begin. Does this thing you saw have historical significance? Does it have political significance? And then the contestants quickly calculate that Mr. Seymour is born in 1860. Did this thing have anything to do with the Civil War, they ask? Did it have anything to do with a person who held political office? Was this man the president? Was this thing you saw unpleasant? And then finally, did Mr. Seymour witness the shooting of President Abraham Lincoln? When Samuel J. Seymour was 5 years old, he was taken by friends to Ford's Theater on April 14th, 1865, and he saw John Wilkes Booth shoot the President of the United States. And when the episode of I've Got a Secret aired, Mr. Seymour was the only living witness of one of the most pivotal events in American history. Now, the Civil War, the Lincoln presidency, his assassination, they've always fascinated me because of their lasting influence on the development of our country. But the players and the events involved, Lincoln, Booth, Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses Grant, the Battle of Gettysburg, they've always been confined to the pages of my history books. It's always been something distant, something abstract, something surreal about this period of history because of the obvious disconnect between my world and theirs. Despite journals and diaries and newspaper clippings, there feels to be a lack of firsthand testimony. Any of us can open up a book, any of us can read what happened during the Civil War, but with no grandparent, no great-grandparent, whispering into our ears, testifying what it felt like to live through the Civil War. Well, it leaves me, at least, feeling empty. And without that emotional firsthand connection, the most horrific and violent period of American history, one which gave birth to equality and civil rights, well, it's nothing more than a chapter in a book. This is why seeing the YouTube video of Samuel Seymour was so fascinating. It allowed the assassination of Lincoln. It allowed the Civil War to leap off the pages of a book. But the excitement generated by linking to a moment in history through a living and breathing witness, it quickly turned to trepidation for me. In 2044, a date I hope to see, an episode of I've Got a Secret could air, where a host escorts an elderly man onto the show, and the host announces his name and his age, 104, and he reveals his secret to the audience. And then there's a collective gasp of disbelief from the men and women in the studio, because the man born in 1940 survived the Holocaust. He's the last living survivor. And for kids watching, kids for whom the Holocaust may be reduced to a history book, kids who will know what happened in Nazi Germany, but who do not have the grandparent, who will not have the great-grandparent or guest speaker in school telling them what it felt like to live through the Holocaust, well, for them, the story will leap off the pages of a book, and it will become real when they're introduced to this guest, the last survivor of the Holocaust. It's for this reason, for this feeling that was inspired in me by a short clip from 1956, that video testimony of the Holocaust is so important. The charge, never again, well, it's just not enough. We're obligated to ensure that the horrors of the Shoah, the memories of its victims, are never reduced, never minimized to the pages of a book. On Tuesday, January 15th, at 7 p.m. at B'nai Aviv in Weston, Florida, we'll be hosting Moving Images, Building the Permanent Exhibition, a program about the creation of the United States Holocaust Memorial, and we'll be privileged to hear from Ray Farr, the director and overseer of Steven Spielberg's film and video archive of the Holocaust. She'll discuss the power of film as evidence, as a window to the past, and as a guarantor that the Holocaust never becomes just another page in a history book. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you at B'nai Aviv on January 15th for this extraordinary event. Shabbat Shalom.